I'm David Maloney, Group Editorial Director. Thanks for joining us. Today we explore fulfillment without compromise, building agility into your supply chain strategy. In an era of economic uncertainty, geopolitical shifts, and rapid changes in consumer behavior, businesses can no longer afford rigid supply chain strategies. Flexibility and resilience are no longer nice to have, they're essential. And this session today explores how forward-thinking retailers and brands are navigating modern fulfillment challenges by designing for agility from the start. Our webcast today is presented by AutoStore. But before we begin our presentation, here are some tips to help you connect and participate in the webcast. Our webcast is designed to be interactive between you and our presenter, so later in the program we'll have a question and answer session to allow you to ask our presenter questions relevant to the topics that we discussed today. Just type your question into the text box on the console, then click the Submit Question button, and we'll get to as many of those as we can during the broadcast. The slides will advance automatically throughout our event. If slides are not advancing, press the F5 key or Control R on your keyboard to refresh your console. And we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. If you're experiencing any kind of technical problems, visit our webcast help guide by clicking on the help link that's below the media player. Now, to begin our presentation, I'm pleased to introduce our presenter today. David Jeziorski is the Enterprise Account Manager at AutoStore. I will now turn the floor over to David for today's presentation. David?
Thanks, David. Happy to be here. Hey, everyone, and welcome. As David mentioned, I am David as well, Jeziorski from AutoStore. Really excited to be with you guys today and here to talk about something that most of us are probably talking about constantly: how to build fulfillment strategies that are not only fast and scalable, but resilient. And most importantly, don't force you into any sort of painful trade-offs or compromise. So there's usually a common belief that you can't have it all. You have to pick between space or speed, cost and or throughput, flexibility or efficiency. The reality is you can have a solution that balances all those things pretty well. And that's really what I meant by fulfillment without compromise. So today, we'll explore what's driving a lot of pressure out there, how the leading companies are responding to this pressure, and how you can apply some of these principles in your operations today. So let's jump in. First off, just a quick intro. I'm David Jeziorski, as David mentioned, Enterprise Account Manager at AutoStore, focused specifically on retail in North America. I will say, maybe more importantly, is before joining AutoStore, I spent about 15 years in engineering and operations roles in some large retailers in North America. So I've spent time on greenfield and brownfield facility launches, DC network redesigns, SKU flow optimization projects, and really end-to-end full automation life cycles from RFP to go live and beyond. So I've seen the good, I've seen the bad and the painful, and I've also seen the really creative ways out there that companies are building smarter fulfillment mechanisms. And my role today really within AutoStore is to help brands from fast-growing startups to Fortune 100 retailers think about what's next. So let's get into the meat of today's discussion. And I think there's no better place to start than kind of just a broad overview of the landscape, right? Kind of a zoomed out macro level view. And as we all know, 2025 really hasn't given us a break. There's new tariff headlines literally every single day. We know that margins are tighter, SKUs are exploding, and we're all expected to ship either with the same expectations or better, all with faster, cheaper, and fewer hands. So the pressure is real, and it's forcing us to rethink how we do fulfillment, more so than ever, I would say. So in 2025, when I talk to retailers, here's kind of the 6 major pressures that most of them are facing. Inflation, the cost of storage, transportation, materials continue to rise, which is really forcing a squeeze on margins, and that's persistent. I won't even get into tariffs because literally it's probably changed since lunchtime. But just the tariffs between China and the EU trade friction have caused companies to really think their sourcing strategies. Where are they putting their inventory? How are they buying product? Sticking with that theme of inventory, I think there's been a big pendulum shift from the way we thought about things during COVID, and now that companies are being challenged with kind of right-sizing their inventories and where should product go, even as the SKU counts are continuing to rise. And then labor. Not only are wage rates increasing by 20% over the last 5 years, but additionally, It's a universal challenge. I mean, think about seasonal ramping. It's almost impossible in some markets due to scarcity and availability of labor. So another thing that I think is a big area of opportunity for most retailers, most companies in general, is returns. I mean, we're at the point now where e-commerce returns accounts for over 16%. That's $740 billion annually in the US alone. It's eating up space, time, and dollars, and it's usually not something that's thought about ahead of time. It's more of an afterthought. And I think expectations, again, as I mentioned, are still very much present, and in fact, even higher, right? Same day and next day shipping are no longer really nice to haves. They're table stakes, even in B2B, right? So I think as we look through all these six, any one of these alone could put enough pressure on a retailer to want to adapt, but the fact that they're all together creating a huge force is really the time right now for retailers to think about a new shift in their fulfillment strategy. So historically, and I'm guilty of this, like we believe the future of distribution and fulfillment would be pretty predictable, right? You could plan your volumes, look at history, try to right size your network based on where the populations were and what your strategy was with stores and your direct to consumer profile, kind of right size your network, maybe bake in 5-7 years worth of growth, and you're good, right? Those are the themes and characteristics that were acceptable at that time. You kind of see here in these pictures. And a lot of fulfillment and distribution operations still look like this, right? We got siloed systems, nodes by channel. Sometimes they're co-located in the same building, but oftentimes they're two distinct sites. We got manual processes, a lot of static and heavy infrastructure, labor stretched thin across a warehouse. I think there's an issue with real-time visibility to data. And I think something to press on here is design rigidity. And I worked at JCPenney, a long time ago, and we would build very bespoke, purpose-built facilities with very, specific processes and solutions built to address the needs of the time. And that design rigidity has caused issues where now things have evolved, and that solution or that piece of technology is no longer applicable or usable. So I think, today demands for more flexibility, right? So you need to be able to serve every channel from any given network. You need the flexibility to scale fast, hopefully without even adding square footage. You need to have real-time visibility and be able to make and adapt to changes on a dime, because we know things will change. So it's really more about rethinking kind of that foundation, using smarter systems, tighter spaces, and being able to respond more quickly. So it's not just about tech, really, and a difference in tech from before and where we're headed to. It's about building control and optionality in your operations from day one. So let's start talking about how kind of leading operational leaders are looking at their supply chain. And we kind of boil it down into this pillars of agility is what I'll call it. It really starts with a mindset shift, kind of ditching the past, fixed decisions, rigid buildings, and really designing more for flex, flow, and future-proofing. So again, I think it all starts with agility, and that's being able to react in real time, right? When demand spikes, when your order profiles shift, when you absorb a new product line, you get new SKUs that come and go, how adaptive are you? How can you still maintain your operations and thrive through those changes? When we think about resilience, it's really staying in motion through those disruptions, right? Obviously, a lot of pressures with tariffs and some uncertainty there. We've seen port disruptions that come and go, cost surges, labor shortfalls. How can you kind of act as a shock absorber and continue to flow through those challenges? And then the other third pillar I would say is modularity. It's how can you expand in layers, not leaps, right? Can you do some incremental steps to grow your storage or your throughput without necessarily not needing to have new real estate or additional assets? So again, some of these are buzzwords, and they are, but I guess where the rubber meets the road is think about your network. How do you reroute your volume instantly if something were to happen? How do you shift the labor within your network to support what you need? How do you add capacity without breaking the budget? And I guess how do you avoid the trap of potentially overbuilding for a peak that never comes? I mean, let's hope that it does, but if it doesn't, and again, I think this is why this is such a foundational kind of construct that we need to be thinking through as we move forward. And I think a perfect case study that brings us to life is Best Buy. I mean, we rewind back to 2018, and they were operating in a more traditional classic setup, right? Retail replenishment and e-comm were handled definitely in distinct separate silos, separate buildings oftentimes, separate processes, and not a lot of synergy. And it worked. It worked in a previous era, but as e-commerce grew and they saw more pressure from Amazon and the like, those silos became a friction point, right? And so what did they do? They kind of looked at their network and they decided to take a bold step and really consolidate their fulfillment operations into these 8 nodes that you see here. These are omni-channel nodes, and they decided to leverage the technology of AutoStore to really bring in all the inventory into these 8 nodes. It allowed them to pool their inventory, kind of share them across channels. They could share labor and equipment and dynamically prioritize by order channel. Really what they did is they turned their entire logistics network into one like flexible omni-channel engine. And you can kind of see the results below. What that unlocked for them was huge. Free next day delivery to over 50 million customers. That wasn't something they could do before. They've actually helped their stores out. They segregate their totes by the aisle that it's going to in their store. That's something that automation helped unlock, allowed the stores to now put product and restock more efficiently, faster order cutoffs, which ultimately lead to a better customer promise. And again, they built something now that's, again, as I mentioned, like a flexible foundation that they can expand and scale upon as they move forward. In fact, just this year, they've actually purchased and placed orders for 2 more AutoStores in Canada. So they've kind of, again, built this foundation. Now they have a common tech thread that they can, now move up into the Canadian region. So just a perfect example of kind of the resilience I was talking about earlier. But I mean, you may be asking yourself, this is great. This is a fantastic example of what happens when you go all in. But let's be honest, and I've seen it in my past, like not every company has the budget, the scale, the boardroom buy-in to greenlight a transformation of that magnitude, right? They spent hundreds of millions of dollars. They did. And the real question for most operators becomes, well, how do I get more out of my existing infrastructure? Whether that's a single DC or a network of DCs. And we call that sweating an asset, right? Taking a site that's supposedly maxed out, how do you find 3x the throughput? Can you double the products you store within the same footprint you're operating in? How can you increase your SKU count by 40% because you get a new brand that you need to absorb? How can we sweat our assets? I think before knowing that, you kind of have to see how much left to squeeze out of your existing asset base. So maybe the next question that's appropriate is, how much potential is being wasted within the 4 walls of your DC? So again, super important question, because I'll tell you, many operations think they're doing their operations pretty well, and maybe they are, until they find out they're sitting on a lot of inefficiencies and untapped capacity. So I like to ground us here with some real numbers. And in a typical manual warehouse where they're doing some piece picking, maybe by pick to cart, and they're walking in and out of aisles, typical workers are going to spend between 8 to 12 miles a day simply, selecting orders. And that's not only exhausting, it's time and energy that's not spent actually productively picking orders. On the same vein, 65% of labor costs of a total operating cost is in the piece picking operation. A lot of that is this order selection, next pick face location, walking, but also replenishment and other facets of piece picking in a manual operation that are very labor intensive. Another one that always gets people, and I love going into new warehouses and just really asking them, like, how well utilized are you? Because a lot of people say, hey, I think we're at capacity or we're near capacity. And I go in, and in reality, they're closer to 30 to 40% utilized on what's fully at capacity from their standpoint. And a lot of that's due to poor location utilization, ineffective slotting, and really just underutilizing that vertical space. So I guess, what does that mean? It means that most folks have more room than they realize to grow in their current footprint. And I think that's critical, because space isn't getting cheaper. It's certainly not getting easier to come by. And in fact, predictions are that population and growth will continue to expand, and the warehousing market will be projected to triple by 2035, the space required. Not to mention also, the last year, we saw about 10% increase in total property costs. So again, there's usually a lot of gas left in the tank if you know where to look within your network. So I guess the question now is what are you going to do? Here's the question that no one really wants to hear, but everyone needs to. Can you afford to do nothing? Honestly, I've been in this decision mode, and it sometimes feels safer to hold off, right? Like we put pick mods in 8 of our buildings. Wouldn't the 9th one make sense to just have another pick mod, or let's replace this tilt tray sorter with a comparable crossbelt sorter? And the reality is the status quo is getting more costly every year. Labor costs are up, as I mentioned, rent's going up, complexity of managing multiple silos and different channels, fragmented inventory, these all erode your margins, right? So if your competitors are scaling fast and dense, the gap doesn't shrink over time either, it widens. So some stats, McKinsey found that companies using advanced automation are twice as likely to outperform on shareholder return. And 60% of supply chain leaders say that their biggest risk is not modernizing fast enough. So transforming fulfillment isn't cheap. Like I said, Best Buy probably spent over $100 million on those 8 facilities, but not transforming, that's the cost that'll quietly drain your business over time. So doing nothing is a decision, and it actually can be a very costly one. So again, it carries a real cost by inaction, right? So on the left, we see what we see every week in legacy facilities. One sorter goes down, your throughput for your network drops by 70%, right? Single point of failure. Demand shifts, and your slotting strategy that you spent months on preparing literally collapses. Maybe you win maybe you're 3PL and you win a new product line or a customer, and you literally can't ingest that volume without sheer and utter chaos. Inventory is in the wrong place. There's no way to balance it. What's worse, maybe the lease in your most critical site is up and the renewal rates are not attractive, or you can't find an affordable space nearby. What are you going to do? So on the right kind of shows more what future-proofing looks like, right? Modular designs, fewer points of failure, the ability to shift volume, really absorb volatility, and be able to reslot not only in real time, but like automatically. You don't need to get another building. Hopefully you can extend the life of what you already have and avoid the cost of doing nothing. And there's always a quote that stuck with me. One of my former GMs had said, your supply chain needs to act as a shock absorber. That's exactly it. It's not about predicting the future, because we're all going to get it wrong. It's about being ready for any future that may come. So there's a lot on this slide, and I'm not going to go through it all. It's really kind of high level and fluffy anyways, but what it's meant to illustrate is that automation isn't binary. It's not I automate or I don't. It's more of a spectrum of solutions depending on your risk levels, your operational complexity, what your throughput needs are, and your business model altogether, right? So a lot of companies will start maybe small, maybe in 1 and 2 in the manual and low automation, maybe have some mechanization, some conveyance, maybe fold into some semi-automated picking systems, into AMRs and AGVs, and eventually grow up the scale, as the confidence and volume increases. So I think what's more important than the attributes on this slide, because again, this is a little bit fluffy and it's not as detailed as you'd ever want to go if you're evaluating technology. It's just that the solution can adapt to your business as it evolves, right? How easily can this solution or set of solutions scale up or pivot without requiring you to rebuild from scratch, tear it out and start over? And that's why, I always go back to the 3 pillars that I showed in that triangle earlier. It's resilience, agility, modularity. Buying for the now doesn't mean necessarily overbuilding or overcommitting. It just means you're buying things smart, right? And you're setting up a foundation that can flex and grow with your needs. So when it comes to automation, I think one of the biggest mindset shifts I try to help teams make is you don't need to solve for everything day one. Simply can't. But you do need to invest in a system that won't box you in on day 2. I think the most successful fulfillment strategies are the ones that balance the short-term needs with the long-term agility. That means choosing automation that gives you the ability to start where you're at today, but again, as I've mentioned, grow and flex and adapt without major disruption tomorrow. So here's kind of a list of questions that I think you should be asking yourselves and potential automation providers as you start to look across the gambit of solutions out there. Can the system scale up fast? And I'm not talking months, quarters, years, days. I need more capacity. Can we get robots? Can we get ports? Can we get whatever and unlocks additional capacity quick? Does it allow you to segregate and separate storage separate from volume, because some years you'll grow in volume, others you might grow in SKUs or depth of SKUs, and those aren't the same thing. The other thing is, can you find a solution that handles not just your A movers, not just your tail, but like the wide gambit of your SKUs, A, B, and C movers in one unified environment? You don't want any manual workarounds or any additional labor or potentially split shipments or anything like that. You'll also want to know, like, is this something that can absorb peaks without needing to overbuild and then scale back when the surge ends? As I've mentioned, you also want something that can support multiple channels. And one thing I love about AutoStore is most of the time they're omni-channel solutions. They support both a retail fulfillment strategy as well as a direct-to-consumer. And what I love most is oftentimes you can go talk to the picker and they won't even know which channel they're supporting in that particular order they're picking, and that's great. I think maybe most importantly, it could help you avoid costly lease extensions, relocations, or even new facilities. So I think when you start to look at these and the general consensus is yes on most of these, you're no longer stuck with building for a future that's unknown. Again, you're going back to building a foundation that you can flex with. So here's an AutoStore. You kind of see it in growth. You see one being built right next to it. And then you can see that, with an AutoStore in particular, you can grow your storage capacity, 4x in this case. You can actually add additional robots and ports to support your throughput as well. So just as an example. And I think a company that really exemplified kind of this whole mindset of building a flexible foundation and building up is PartsDown, which they do a lot of parts and repair things for appliances. So you think your commercial kitchens, dishwashers, refrigerators, they have a huge, huge range of parts and SKUs that they carry. So let's go back to maybe a decade ago, 2015, they were growing at super pace, experiencing growth 30% year over year. Again, they were supporting 1 million SKUs in a very manual way, which is extremely challenging, and still trying to uphold this same day shipping promise. And basically at some point, they just couldn't do it. They hit their limit. They reached out to their integrator. They started their automation journey, not with an AutoStore. In fact, in 2015, it was more about how do we improve our shipping department and our sortation. So they installed a shipping sorter to bring efficiency. But what I love is in 2016, they introduced their first AutoStore. But it's a nice little baby AutoStore, relatively small, and this really helped them break some of those limits I mentioned with both storage and order processing. And as you can see here, they left space for growth, so they really were thinking ahead. Flash forward 2 years later, 2018, not only did they add some conveyor and some complementary technology, they also doubled their AutoStores. Flash forward here. Now you can see it here. It's almost doubled in space. They built some additional sortation and conveyance around it. And then they kept experiencing growth. And I would like to think that a lot of this unlock of the growth was because of some of this thing. It certainly helped enable it. But in 2011, they saw the need to again expand. So now they have expanded and nearly quadrupled the size of their AutoStore from the original kind of square that you once saw it. And they've added, again, some additional complementary and amplifying technology around it. So again, I think what's great about them is they bought what they needed when they needed it, but they bought and they built the bones to grow. I think it's a great example of when automation is done right. I've seen it when it's not done right. And they weren't just trying to solve today's problem. They were doing that, but also trying to build a flexible foundation for tomorrow. Again, I think the key focus point here is they didn't overbuild. They weren't trying to design to some 8 to 10 year roadmap, because they would have built, again, this big solution on day one. They probably couldn't afford it and wouldn't have got the return they needed. But I think what's really interesting is how this investment has continued to pay them back across multiple areas, not just labor or speed, space savings, peak season agility or accuracy, but all those things. So I think it kind of brings us next into the next slide, which kind of talks about ROI and how do you justify automation in general, right? What are the levels you can pull, and how do you make sure you're capturing the full value, not just labor and some of the obvious things. So here's kind of the overview into 6 buckets, and there's more, but this is kind of what I've distilled it down into that really can help drive and defend your ROI. Because honestly, the truth is, and most people think about automation and goods to person as a labor play. If you do this you're probably gonna have a lot of trouble getting your solution approved, just to be honest. It's very rare that the labor play alone will fully justify a project. So you really got to look at it more comprehensively, more holistically, as how does this revolutionize, how does it modernize my fulfillment in other ways? So I think we can start with accuracy. And I think this is great because even small improvements in picking accuracy can make a huge impact, right? Sometimes it's hard to quantify, but we're talking about returns reduction, customer complaints going down, no more manual rework. And for retailers, it's honestly not just cost savings. This is hard to quantify, but like it's brand protection. You don't want to lose a customer in this environment. This is the truth. Labor, again, is probably the most obvious bucket. You can usually reduce headcount or reallocate assets and resources within your building. But I think what's equally as important is you're making jobs less physically demanding, more sustainable. It's a job that you and I and everyone would probably be okay with doing. So it's going to be easier to retain talent in a tough market. Peak is another huge one. And having lived 13, 14 peaks, I know that we used to bring labor in well ahead of peak just to make sure that the ramp, and also understanding that we're going to lose 70% of what we brought in. So automation can help give you that flexibility to ramp without as much temp labor. You can usually do it later. And it's really that 2-month, 3-month window leading up to peak that you can get a competitive advantage that typically makes or breaks most retailers' P&L, right, during that period ahead of peak. So I think theft and shrink is another big one that most folks kind of neglect to put in any sort of business case. And if you think about AutoStore and other technologies as well, the fact that it's stored securely and touched less often and more regulated, you're going to reduce your loss. Like, it's plain and simple. And I think it's an area that most folks don't even realize how much they're leaking to begin with. When we talk about space, it's another one that, like, some people elect to not put in their business case, but it's one of the biggest drivers of being able to get an automation project approved, right? Avoiding having to opening a new building is an obvious one, but maybe you're just delaying a lease extension. Maybe you're repurposing that existing square footage in your building for another internal process. Either way, these need to be captured and quantified as best you can into an ROI. And I think one that I like throwing in here is transportation. And this one may feel like a little disjointed or removed, but when you consolidate nodes or you're increasing throughput for site, sometimes just reducing outbound errors, like there's downstream savings in both shipping and transportation and fuel. So those could be huge. So I think the purpose is, I just wanted to say, it's not a one-dimensional exercise. We're not saying, hey, we went from 35 FTE to 10 FTE in picking and replen. Great, it's a 7-year ROI. You really got to add it across multiple buckets. And, I think that's really when automation and supply chain go from becoming a cost center to more of a strategic weapon too. So I guess just looking ahead, and obviously no crystal ball here, no real bold predictions, but what do I think's ahead? I think we're going to see systems that continue to touch on the philosophies I just mentioned. They're going to see systems that adapt in real time. So they're going to be able to kind of handle the surges across nodes and maybe add some strategy and some logic and optimization around how we switch between those channels. I think we're going to see AI continue to be more and more leveraged when it comes to forecasting, slotting, flow balancing, and a lot of this will happen automatically and in the back. I think what also is cool is you see flexible commercial models. So again, we're seeing a lot of automation providers move from kind of CapEx and very more rigid payment models into more flexible ones. So we see as a service offerings, more of capacity on demand, pay when you need type models that allow you to scale without overcommitting like you had to in the past. And then I think what's probably most exciting off to the right is just some of the next gen capabilities. I think on the tech side, we're going to continue to see robotic piece picking, and then we're going to continue to see what I'll call as like complementary technology that could be bolstered and added to a particular ASRS to kind of amplify the effects and get more out of the solution you got. So I think the future is going to be more of what we're seeing now. It's going to be flexible. It's going to be about building an intelligent and foundation. So I think before we hop into Q&A, just wanted to leave you with a quick recap. I know a lot of these we touched on quite a bit, but we covered a lot. And I think the major focus is like, you don't need to compromise. Again, I don't think you need to pick on speed or space, flexibility or cost. Like there are solutions out there that can blend a lot of those together and kind of create a solution that's best for you. So we looked at how to make better use of the assets you already have, how to scale your modular automation, how to set yourself up for change, right? Not just for today's demand, but for whatever tomorrow brings, which who knows? And then just questions, I guess, to leave yourself. Are we building optionality into our operations? Are we giving ourselves the ability to flex? Are we just hoping that nothing changes? Because I think that was a strategy that I've seen before in my past. And I think if you're asking these type of questions, it's a really good sign and you're on the right path. But definitely we'd love to be a part of that conversation as AutoStore as things progress in your automation journey. So I think with that, that concludes my content, and I'd love to step into a Q&A session, David.
Great. Thank you. Very nice job, David.
Oh, real quick, I'm sorry.
Yes, please.
Just real quick, a few links. I do have my LinkedIn link here. You can just search my easy last name and find me. You can also visit AutoStore at autostoresystem.com or email directly at davidjeziorski at AutoStore Systems. So thanks again.
Great. And we'll keep that slide up during a question and answer time. And it is time for us to move into that portion of our presentation. If you did not yet get a chance to send in your question, now's the time to do it. Just, again, type it into the console, submit it to us. But we'll get to as many of those questions as we can in the time remaining. The first question, I think, is a common one that people face is they know they have to do something. They have to get into some sort of automation. They want to explore automation, but they don't know where to start. So there are so many options and vendors out there. Where do they begin?
Yeah, that's fair. Been in those shoes, and it's certainly overwhelming out there. I guess my recommendation would be to not start with the technology in mind, unless it's an AutoStore. No, but seriously, I think you need to start with asking, like, what are your biggest pain points? What's holding you back from throughput, speed, space, what is it? And then what kind of growth or change are you planning to experience the next 3 to 5 years, the best you know? And I think once you've defined your problem, then it makes sense to bring in potentially vendors or integrators, because not all automation is created equal, and some are meant more for pallet movement, case picking, some are more piece picking based for ultra-dense storage. So I'd always recommend starting with data, and if you have the ability to look at your own data and start to synthesize like order volume and SKU profile, space utilization, that's a good place to start. And then folks like us can come in and help assess fit, and maybe model a right-sized solution and maybe a path forward. And if the solution doesn't fit, maybe that's an AutoStore and it doesn't fit, we'll let you know. Like, the last thing we want you to do is go down a path that doesn't make sense for you. So great question, though.
Yeah, that makes sense. The next question, I think, reflects kind of the old way of thinking of distribution as just a cost center and not something that could be a strategic advantage for you. The person is saying, I'm on board with this and I see the value, but I'm not sure my executive leadership sees it the same way. They still view supply chain as a cost center. They don't see significant investment in going to something like this. What can you do in that kind of case?
Yeah, also been in those shoes. I mean, listen, it's sometimes tough to convince leadership that this is the right direction they should go. There's a lot of competing priorities. A CFO's got a lot on their plates, but again, I think the problem is, in general, leadership teams will frame automation as kind of an expense, and they see supply chain as a cost center, just historically, not really a strategic enabler. So I think part of that is how we can translate. So as an automation explorer, you need to be able to kind of translate the ROI into their language. Maybe if you're talking to a CFO, you talk in these terms, and it's all about payback and return, and this is the best thing. When you talk to your tech teams, it might be about simplicity and ability to be modular and expand as you grow. So I think it's kind of tailoring your message depending on who you're talking to on that executive team. And then I think, as I mentioned, one of the most powerful things that I've been successful with is kind of illustrating what the cost is to do nothing, right? Like, what does it mean? Just start asking questions. Like, we keep missing orders. How much does this cost? Well, take this and we miss this many orders. That's that's $10 million a year. Labor costs are rising 20%. So in 5 years from now, we're going to need to have, $15 million budget for this building. If we had automation, maybe it'd be 10. So start to really make them feel like they're missing out if they, and that they're missing opportunity if they don't automate. And I guess the last thing I'd say is you don't have to start big, right? At least with a lot of solutions. You can start small, maybe even pilot it, right? You don't have to do the Best Buy and just go all in. Start small, maybe a pilot site, kind of like Parchtown. Learn with it, grow with it, see the savings, realize the savings, right? On paper, you have it. Look, this is what we saw with this subset of SKUs we put in here. If we, extrapolate this forward to our entire SKU breadth, like we'll have this much savings. This is great. So I would say start small and show the results and build from there.
Right. And as we said in the very beginning, automation isn't just a nice, I wish you had it kind of thing, but it's something that's going to be essential in the future. Our next question comes from a viewer who asks, what markets do you see as exciting or primed for the AutoStore technology?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the beauty of AutoStore, I would say that as long as it fits in the bin from a product standpoint, it's usually a pretty good candidate for our system. I'd say we have systems across the globe in grocery, retail, apparel, industrials. And again, as long as the product is conducive to fitting in a bin and is picked at kind of in each level, it's usually a pretty good fit. So we don't have any real hard stops on what should go in there from a commodity standpoint.
Speaking of good fit, integration is always an issue with any kind of technology. And this person is writing that there's a lot of great technology out there, but how well does it actually integrate? Can different systems really work together seamlessly?
Yes, hopefully, if you have a good integrator. But it is a common concern that I hear, and it's valid. I think the market's full of a lot of shiny objects and great hardware, robots, shuttles, sorters. But this person's right, like putting that all together and kind of orchestrating that is a challenge. And I would say look for solutions like AutoStore that have kind of an ecosystem, right? Like AutoStore is intentionally designed to be modular and software agnostic. You can really plug it into any upstream or downstream systems, whether it's your WMS, ERP, WES. So that's really important. And then, like I mentioned, like you want to pick a good integrator that's done this before. I mean, truly, an integrator typically is more than just an installer. They're usually the ones that are orchestrating the entire flow of your building. So make sure you vet integrators and make sure that they have experience incorporating different technologies together. I'd say is pretty important, but very doable. I mean, there's a lot of companies out there right now that are focused specifically on interconnectivity of technologies and kind of being those agents that act between different types of technologies. So good question.
Our next question has to deal with change management, because anytime you do any kind of automation or any major changes within your facility, you have to work through all that management change. So the question is, what kind of change management is required when introducing automation like AutoStore? And how do we assure adoption and avoid disruption? I guess kind of getting buy-in with it as well.
Yeah, that's a really important facet of doing this whole thing, right? I think that's where a lot of projects either succeed or struggle, is the change management behind it. And it's really a cultural shift, right? You're not just changing technology, you're changing like how people work, how performance is measured, how things flow through the building. So you really got to think through it. I would say start early and communicate often. Like soon as hey, we're probably going to move forward with XYZ piece of technology, like bring your warehouse folks in at all levels and start to communicate it to them and get their input at the supervisor level, at the hourly level, and start to tell them the why, start to hear their input. The other big thing too, and we hear this all the time, is like automation is going to take jobs away. It just needs to be reframed, right? We're not trying to necessarily cut heads. I hate that term, but like we need to redefine roles. So I think what you need to do is just let the team know, like, we're going to let natural attrition happen and people will go. But at some point, there'll be a new type of job and many jobs that support this new piece of technology. And they're more skilled jobs, maybe higher paying jobs, maybe better quality of life type jobs. So I think there's ways that you can kind of incorporate change management into the early stages. And then I would say lastly, just like celebrate the wins. So as you go through, maybe you've just done integration testing, or maybe you're going through start of go live and you're starting to ramp, like celebrate early wins, even if you're not to the ramp level you're supposed to be. Like, share metrics, talk about success stories, and just get people excited about the project is what I would say.
Well put. David, you did have in your slide deck a slide on ROI, return on investment. So what is the typical payback period for this kind of investment?
That is a very common question, and I have a terrible answer. It depends. I would say that it's not a one-size-fits-all equation. I would say those are the factors you need to consider, but a lot of what it really boils down to is like where you're coming from and what you're moving to. I mean, again, like if you're in a very manual operation and you got 2 DC nodes, there might be this much room for improvement. Where if I'm in multi-level pick mods, I got pick to light, I'm doing some pretty awesome things as it is, it may be harder to justify. I also think it's really important, again, to factor in as much as you can quantify, because if you don't, you're going to be leaving things on the table. You're going to present to your CFO a 7-year ROI, a payback, and he's going to say this isn't right. So typically, and we had Forrester, a publication company, kind of look at I think 5 or so of our customers and kind of did some interviews. With an AutoStore, most folks see a return between 18 months and 3 years. But again, the mileage may vary. I've seen some that are less than 18 months. I've seen some that are fully justified on transportation savings. I've seen some that extend to 5 years, but it still makes sense for the business. So that's something that if you engage with me or AutoStore or any other vendors, they'll be able to help you kind of hone in on.
Yep. Even a 5-year payback period is a good investment for the long-term future.
Beautiful.
And as you said, most of them are much shorter. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. If we didn't get to your question, you can still go ahead and ask it, and we'll have somebody follow up with you directly. We also encourage you to go to AutoStoreSystem.com for more information. That, again, is on your screen, as well as David's contact information. Again, that's AutoStoreSystem.com. You can get some more information about what we talked about today. And then shortly after this live event, you'll also receive an email reminder to access our presentation again on demand, so you can view it one more time or share it with a colleague. Thank you again, David. Very informative session. We really appreciate your insights. And we'd also like to thank you, our viewers, for being with us. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate that you chose to spend part of your day watching this webinar. For David and for all of us at DC Velocity, I'm Dave Maloney. Have a great rest of your day.